An early investor that you pitched for Gamma called it the worst idea he had ever heard and then hung up on you.
That's right. None of those other startups were our true competition. Our competition is behavior change. We have to get people that are used to using slides to get them to give another format a try.
How do you think about storytelling as a skill for a founder in like that early stage?
You almost have to go through Cringe Valley for many, many months. And I think most people stop when they hit the first part of Cringe Valley because it's so painful. I encourage everybody to try to make it through because I do think the payoff is worth it.
Grant, welcome to Minus One.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So there's this anecdote that you share. We talked about a little bit about it right before this, about an early investor that you pitched for Gamma, who called it, I hope I'm getting this right, the worst idea he had ever heard, and then hung up on you.
That's right.
Totally unrelated question. When you were writing the press release for the Series B that valued your company at $2 billion as a profitable AI company with $2 million in ARR per employee, were you thinking about anyone in particular?
No, that memory, although it's seared in my head, a lot of the, recent part of the journey is just like, embracing that we're still early in the grand scheme of things. And also reflecting on what he said, what he followed after saying that this was the worst idea was that the space we're operating in is filled with, massive incumbents. They have ultimate distribution. And so his speculation was that there's just no way we'd win as a startup. And so I think there's truth in that. And for us to kind of internalize knowing that entering this market just meant that we would really have to think about growth from day one, distribution, how can we make a product that has a chance of actually competing against these incumbents. And so in many ways, I appreciate the fact that even early on in the journey, there was a wake-up call to not take what we have for granted and make sure we don't squander the opportunity in front of us.
So to be clear, the opportunity was take on PowerPoint, right? I get you were saying it, an incumbent with great distribution,
PowerPoint,
sort of underselling it.
And Google Slides.
Yeah, but Google Slides, right, yeah, talking about like built-in distribution there.
Exactly.
Office and Google Suite, yeah. What led to you, I'm very interested in the mechanics of how people discover or decide on the thing that they actually want to go and build. What was the process that led up to being like, yeah, PowerPoint, let's kill PowerPoint slides, like?
Yeah, in many ways, there was maybe a problem I've been thinking about for a long time. So I started my career in investment banking and consulting, lived many...
A lot of slides.
Late nights, living in slides, editing slides, formatting slides. And even then, just having the feeling like...
You dream in slideshows, don't you?
Yeah, dreaming in slideshows. Well, why am I spending so much time formatting and trying to design the thing rather than the content itself? So, obviously slides as a format has been a medium for communication throughout my career. And after the last startup I was at was acquired, I went back into advising early stage startups. I was using Google Slides as how I'd communicate to my clients and just had the same frustration. One late night, trying to prepare for a big meeting the next day, getting all my ideas onto, this canvas. And again, spending 90% of the time, formatting the deck rather than actually working on the content, the structure, the story. And that tipping point was, okay, you're asking the question, like, what if there's a better way?
Okay. So I guess it sort of makes sense, especially having come from like, if you were doing it in consulting or, you went through and had been living in slides for like your whole career. But at that point you had to also convince people to come and join you, right? So your founding team is sort of like getting the band back together a little bit.
Right.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. So, my two co-founders and I, we worked together for 5+ years at another startup called Optimizely. And that's where, we became friends. We worked together. We've had talked about maybe someday trying to do something together. And yeah, early on when it was just me with the idea, they're the first two I called. And we, decided, hey, what if we just allowed ourselves some time to tinker in the space, come up with some prototypes? What might it look like if we try to reimagine the way people present their ideas? And after about 4 or 5 months of tinkering, that gave us a first chance of actually creating a working prototype, something we can use, ironically in this case, to actually pitch our idea. So we used, instead of Google Slides, we used the prototype of Gamma to pitch the idea of Gamma and try to raise our initial round of funding.
Yeah, I remember I was chatting with Evan, one of the other investing partners here.
And he was the first check in.
And he mentioned that, you used the product in the pitch for the product.
Right.
How good was the product at the time, or how much of it were you sort of like, yeah, don't pay attention to this part. No, this is what I want you to focus. Like, where were you hiding bits of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't a truly usable product, but I think it captured the spirit of what we're going after, which is we weren't trying to be better than PowerPoint, but we were trying to be fundamentally different. And so for us, being different was better than being better. We wanted to approach it with a new lens. What would the primitives look like if we could embrace the way people, were working today, rather than sitting in the front of the same screen, like same projector? So many of us consume information on our phones or different devices. So we knew we wanted something that could be, mobile friendly by default. It could be interactive. It could be multimedia rich. And all of that came through in the prototype. You can go through it. You can click on things, really have control around like information density, and really be able to navigate in ways that just aren't possible with a traditional slide deck. And I do think the prototype, even though it was pretty rudimentary, conveyed a lot of those concepts. And even in a very short demo, I can show you that, yeah, maybe our long-term direction doesn't look exactly like this, but we're going to take a fundamentally different approach to this category.
Right. Yeah, you identified something that was significantly different enough, kind of a core thesis about how this is different than PowerPoint. It's interesting that you bring up the bit about kind of mobile and the like adaptability of the form. Obviously, like if you use Gamma now, that's one of the most notable things about it is how kind of seamlessly it reformats things to whatever kind of size screen you're using. And it's meant to make it very, very easy to just port whatever you're trying to communicate to whatever platform you have to do it on. Was that the kind of core idea from the beginning, or was that one that you were sort of tinkering around being like, there has to be something better? And then you finally got on this thing, you're like, why? I can't just do this with my, like static slide, or.
It was one of the core ideas from the beginning, but I would say it wasn't necessarily the core idea that led to the initial inflection point in terms of growth and usage. We did have this notion of if we can make it, more malleable, mobile friendly, all those things, we thought that was going to be important. But what really mattered to our early users was the fact that you could create stuff effortlessly. It was really, really fast. You don't have design skills, you don't have design background, design resources, but you can still go in and create something that looked professional and worthy of sharing. And, for us, it was a good learning moment that, sometimes, you have a list of things that you think are value props. You should show it to the world and let the world tell you what's actually useful.
Yeah, they look at like 90% of it and they're like, I really don't. Yeah. I just see the one thing and they're like, oh, what about that?
Totally. And you will never know really until you kind of get it out there.
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, early on, there was another pretty well-funded competitor in the space. Right. And in fact, they sort of like raced out to just kind of a crazy funding lead, right? They had a bunch of like top tier investors on their cap table.
Right.
And they either don't exist anymore or pivot away to something else completely. I'm not so interested in like the sort of specific details of like, oh, what were the things that you did different than that company? But I am interested in like the psychology of it. Right? Because you have remained, I mean, even up until now, but especially in those early years, you were very lean, right? And to be kind of a lean team in a world where there's this like, some like investors were trying to kingmake, right? Were there specific ways that you kind of thought about that, or were you actually just trying to like tune it out?
So internally, one thing that we really value is transparency. So obviously you don't ignore things that happen in the fundraising market, and if other companies are getting invested in, it's not that we don't talk about it, but we're also very transparent in that we always believe that none of those competitors matter. None of those other startups were our true competition. Our competition is behavior change. We have to get people that are used to using slides, because it was invented almost 40 years ago. That is the default, to get them to give another format a try. And we were always more worried about how do we even earn the right to be in the conversation? Somebody will pick us up, use it, and we can truly be integrated in how they want to create presentations. And so we were never worried about that. You can always draw inspiration from what other tools or startups are doing, and that's great. I think that's healthy for just the ecosystem in general, because there's so many talented teams out there. They're doing cool work. And in many ways, you can always ask yourself, like, what are they doing great at that maybe you want to fold into the mix? And so I thought they always had, interesting approach to just the overall problem space. But honestly, we were never worried about that, because we knew we had a bigger challenge ahead of us, which is the behavior change portion.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter if there's a big incumbent when the bigger incumbent, or not incumbent, a big challenger when the bigger incumbent is like, again, big FANG companies, right? Like,
totally.
There's another story that we were chatting about earlier that has to do with kind of crisis moment, like an important moment in the company's history, which was the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, which obviously like affected a ton of people. It was like just an incredibly dramatic and kind of hair on fire moment. I remember that from our side at SBC, and just everyone on the team was just like on the phone constantly trying to help founders figure out like, what do you do when suddenly your bank isn't there?
Yeah.
You had a particularly acute, like unfortunately timed moment with your company. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess, maybe to rewind maybe a few months before that moment, we had gotten to the point where we had just come out of a product hunt launch, which ended up going pretty well. We ended up winning product of the day, product of the week, product of the month. Felt great, sign-ups spiked, and then they sort of plateaued. And we had this moment of realizing that what we had created some initial interest, but not enough to drive organic growth. If we were to continue growing, we'd have to find other mechanisms of actually, filling the top of the funnel and trying to get more and more users. And we felt like that meant that the fundamental part of the sort of product and the growth engine was broken. We didn't have something that could be self-sustaining. So for us, that was a moment of, okay, well, we need to really go back and kind of redo the entire creation flow within Gamma. The product needs to be dead simple. We need to be able to actually win over users and have them come back and use the product. And it needs to be good enough so that people tell all their friends about, so that we actually have some sort of organic virality. So this was basically end of December, coming in on January, and we basically gave ourselves just over 3 months to try to address this problem. And for us, it really much was a bet the company moment, because coming up on March, we were about a year of runway left, no meaningful traction, definitely not enough organic growth to sort of make it to the next round of funding. And so this bet the company moment was, okay, heads down, everybody in the company focus on just the first 30 seconds of the product experience, make that feel magical, earn the right to have people tell their friends about it. And 2 weeks before our launch date is when the Silicon Valley Bank collapses. And of course, that was a moment of crisis, because we don't know if we're going to be able to make payroll. And certainly working with a lot of our early investors to try to figure this out in the background. And of course, we know employees are reading about this in the news as well. So as a company, again, we've always been super transparent. So we ended up calling the entire company together. We had our own all hands. And at this stage of the company, we were in a converted 2-bedroom apartment. So calling an all hands meant calling everybody into one of the bedrooms and setting everybody down and saying, we don't know how we're going to make payroll, but you have our word that we're doing everything we possibly can to figure this out. And we can't move the launch date. We owe it to ourselves to see it through. We're going to ship this thing one way or another. Even if the company shuts down, we've worked way too hard not to ship this thing. And so we ended up sticking to the launch date. Fortunately, the SVB stuff worked itself out, but I think for us, we sort of earned some resiliency going through that, coming through it on the other side, just knowing that, we would do whatever it takes. We launched successfully. The launch was immediate spike in sort of growth. We did start seeing that organic virality.
Is that the kind of like first moment in the company we really had that sustainable,
sustainable growth, thousands of signups, growing every single day. And so for better or worse, going through that moment, I think did make us a tougher, more resilient team, and also formed kind of this sort of closeness, knowing that we were never going to shy away from challenges or like these hard moments, and we were going to get through it together.
Yeah. So you had mentioned there that at the time your team was the size such that you could fit it into a 2-bedroom apartment.
Right.
And you one of the kind of notable things about Gamma is that you've remained relatively small, right? And I remember when you shared that you were going to announce the Series B, that the thing that really stood out is the 2 million in ARR per employee, which really just like drives home kind of how successful this lean team has been. Was that a very conscious decision that like, look, we want to actually try to keep the teams smaller? Was it related to like, we've been through that kind of an experience where it's like look at what we were able to do at that size? Or how have you thought about team growth as your company has grown?
Yeah, so it's never been with a specific ARR per employee goal in mind, or like, oh, let's keep the number under a certain, headcount under a certain number. But it is much rooted in us wanting to, be scrappy, to have the mindset of always wanting to do more with less, and to really try to be as efficient as possible every step of the way. Certainly going through the SVB collapse, also just we recognize that I think Paul Graham calls it like cockroach mode or whatever it means, like be so resilient that you can survive anything. I do think a lot of that started at that point. And then part of this was also we've always had this internal saying we're going to hire painfully slowly. And a part of that is a cultural thing in that we want to be able to feel that, we're opening a new role, we know exactly what we're looking for. In many instances in my part of the company, where a lot of these functions were going 0 to 1, I've never led marketing. And so when I go out and try to think about, okay, how do I build a great marketing team? I really felt like I needed to do part of the job myself so I can have a deeper appreciation for what it actually entails. I oftentimes think about this as like, you're not trying to become an expert necessarily in that particular function, but you're serving as reconnaissance. You're going out, you're scouting what this role looks like. You now know what great could be because you know how hard the role is.
Yeah.
And when you go interview people, you actually know what to ask. And where maybe there are some of the traps in terms of maybe simplified thinking or oversimplified thinking. And can someone go deep enough to actually help you navigate, what's to come? And so for me, it was actually really helpful. And then when we eventually hired our head of marketing, I felt like I was well equipped to be able to actually assess whether or not she'd be a great fit. And she's been in this role now for almost a year. I was trying to lead marketing before that, and she's been amazing, built a great team. And I think a lot of that is attributed to that foundation we laid early on.
Yeah, so hire painfully slowly in that like you have to go experience the pain of not having someone.
Yeah. Don't default to hire, default to like knowing what you're actually trying to accomplish.
Okay. I mean, it brings up a subject I wanted to focus on a little bit that I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is related to marketing, storytelling.
Yeah.
One of the things I saw recently was that you, correct me if I'm wrong, but had referred to Gamma recently as a storytelling platform.
Visual storytelling.
Yeah, right. And I'm interested in your take on the idea of storytelling as like a skill set. Right, because obviously, you create tooling for that skill set for like a particular kind of it, right? But it is fundamentally about like, how do we make this easier? First of all, just like, how do you think about storytelling as a skill for a founder in like that early stage, right? Where you're perhaps still thinking like, I have to know what it's like to be like the head of marketing before I can go and hire the marketer. I don't even know what that means from a storytelling perspective, or talking to a investor who says, this is the worst idea ever,
Yeah. I mean, this is where, to your point, it comes in many different, forms, different shapes, and all of that is critical. As a founder, you are storytelling in many different ways. To your point, part of this is like selling your own vision, and you'll have to, sell investors on, why they should even believe in what you're trying to do. And the team you have, you're going to have to constantly sell the vision of to future candidates and employees, and like, why should they even care to join you when there's a million other startups doing interesting things that are maybe even more well-funded than you? And then of course you have to sell your customers around, like, going back to behavior change, like why should they waste any time in your tool when another tool can do the same job? And so there's that element of it. I think there's also just, storytelling being just this timeless skill. It's obviously deeply rooted in just how humans build relationships, how information gets spread. And so for us, like, even if we get to play one really small, sliver of that role across many different types of people, like, that excites us, because there's nothing in our minds that creates higher leverage than being able to help people communicate more effectively. It's going to bring us together. It's going to help us innovate. And so for us, it's inspiring to know that we can play a big role in that, and play a role on a global basis. Like, obviously storytelling is not limited to just people in the US. It's global. It's a need that's universal. So that's always been what's really been inspiring for us. And as I've become just, more sort of kind of acknowledging that other forms of storytelling might take shape in, like, marketing, and like, how do we build a brand that people recognize and want, that resonate with a lot of people? How do you tell that in a compelling way, and trying to just get better at that craft? I always encourage, founders to think about now stepping into becoming a creator or an influencer in a way, because you can be your company's megaphone. But that is a skill that needs to be developed over many, months, years, maybe decades.
Yeah, you have to actually do it.
You actually have to do it.
Yeah.
Like any craft, it's something you have to actually do, and there's no shortcuts. And even if AI makes certain things easier from a first draft perspective, they're still your ideas, and you're still the one telling them, and they have to be authentic. And so that's something I've had much more appreciation for kind of in this past past year, just knowing that you have a responsibility to really get better at that craft.
I'm interested in how you think about it as like storytelling as product, right? To the point you just made about like, you can make certain things easier, but ultimately it's still something you are trying to communicate. And I always sort of wrestle with this, like there is value in some amount of struggle with something, or like putting something down and then having to change it because you don't like it, right? And like the friction of trying to get what is in your head in like out into a form that other people can appreciate. But then there are also the sorts of things where it's like, I really hate this part of it, right? Yeah. Like, and for you, that was probably things like, I hate having to format these slides.
Totally.
I mean, is this something that you guys talk about internally, right? As you were thinking about the product, like what are the things that, like people actually just really want this abstracted away, but this is where they want to feel a sense of control and like specificity?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always considered this to be, human in the loop. Even with AI, it very much is still a tool. And there's like the examples of, Betty Crocker and like the cake mix where, they try to ship a new category of product and they made it, dead simple. You just add water and you're done. And people didn't want to buy that product because it didn't feel like they did any work. And it didn't feel like when they served that to someone in their household that they put any sort of TLC into it. And so then they said, okay, well, now you have to buy your own egg and add that egg in, and you have to mix it in. And now all of a sudden you're making the cake, right? And so even that level of touch makes it feel that the human is actually doing something. And from a product standpoint, what are the ways you can really involve and help people feel like they're making some decisions? AI can assist you along the way, but ultimately it's still your choice, and you have to have a vision for what the output should look like and hopefully be able to craft that. And so we wanted to make sure that we can create like the building blocks where humans can really much feel like they're involved and ultimately feel like whatever they're putting out there is a true expression of what they want to put out there, and not just sort of AI generated, output that's completely untouched by their input.
Mm-hmm. Has your thinking on storytelling, either as product or as like a skill set as a founder to develop, has it changed as you have built the company, right? Is there like, do you think about it differently now than you did in 2020 or in 2019, any time before you started Gamma?
I mean, I think the biggest thing I've appreciated more is that, at every stage of the company, the team might need to hear a different type of story, right? When you're just getting started, the story of like belief, like the true 0 to 1. I have no idea how we're going to get there, but together we're going to figure it out. And so you try to focus on the small wins and like making sure that there is this feeling of momentum that's building, even if you haven't hit certain milestones. Like it used to be, you have to get to like 1 million in ARR before you feel like you can, go and raise your, whatever Series A. And I think as part of being a founder, your job is to, how do you feel like the company's making progress when in fact, maybe a lot of the work is kind of blind to like any true milestone. And so that is early on. Then as you start hitting some of these milestones, then it's like, okay, how do you continue to elevate the company to have even bigger ambition and to make sure that the rest of the company can tell your story or whatever story that needs to be told, even when you're not there. So if you have a sales team that needs to pitch, a big enterprise customer, you as a founder might do it in a certain way. Hopefully, even if you're not in the room, the sales team can still emulate that in some form. And so you need to be able to create a story that is repeatable and is used all the time and has the right sort of sound bites or things that you feel can be easily digestible to others. And so you're kind of making it almost like you're trying to create these molds that people can then take and use and kind of craft into their own, way of telling the story. So yeah, it just kind of changes over time. And I think the types of stories, the importance of the urgency, or even the level of impact of these stories all sort of changes. And for me, I don't think I appreciated that on day one. But now living through a few different chapters of growth, I recognize just how important that is to try to get right.
What about yourself as an audience?
Yeah.
One of the things I often say to people who come to SBC and founders that we work with is like the very first audience is yourself, right? Like you actually have to believe it. And if you don't, that's a pretty good sign that maybe this isn't the thing you should build, right? Go build conviction on something else. Were there any like practical things that as you were working through, okay, how do I, like, what is the story I want to tell to the team that I'm leading here? as it's sort of like evolving over time, would you do things for yourself in particular to start?
Kind of. I think the one really challenging thing, and this is particular to even like content creation for like founders, which this is not their natural thing. Typically, like, go on LinkedIn or, Twitter and try to post on things. But I think what's really hard in the beginning is you do want to be your own, like, critic and like, go through and like read that stuff. But you almost have to go through, Cringe Valley for many, many months before you come out of it feeling like, okay, I'm actually starting to put some stuff out there that's worthy.
Valley, I love it.
That's actually worthy of being read, right? And I think most people stop when they hit the first part of Cringe Valley because it's so painful to like read some of your early stuff. You're like, oh, why am I even doing this? And then you get like one like, and it's like from your wife or something. You're like, okay, well, yeah, I'm just gonna stop. And I think it's very tempting to want to stop there. But you do need to go through that process because, again, going back to any craft is like you start getting better. You start seeing what kind of resonates of all the things you want to talk about, like what do people care about? And then you can start double down on, on that category and like refine and get better, read, like understand, like then create the feedback loop of, okay, now I get a better sense of like what people care about. How do I incorporate that to the next round? But it's really hard. And I think most of us, once you have that moment of doubt, the easiest thing to do is just kind of stop and go off and do something easier. These are truly long-term investments. And yeah, I encourage everybody to try to make it through because I do think the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, I have a saying that cringe is the path to glory.
Yeah.
And it's true, like most people actually the advice I give to people are like, oh, how do I get better at writing? How do I get better at storytelling? How do I get better at this particular form of content? It's always like, you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you do have to get through that period where it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
And specifically where you will get feedback that it is bad. It's like any other skill set where you do it more and more and you develop a better and better sense of what works and you start understanding, okay, what are the signals I need to pay attention to? Where am I more opinionated about the way to do this? And you just get better at it.
Yeah, and if you're authentic and you're sharing like your own stories, then hopefully as the company succeeds and you have true learnings or true insights or mistakes you want to be able to help, others learn from, then it becomes easier. You have a bigger body of work. In the beginning, you might not have a whole lot of that, and that's okay. And this is where it becomes extra cringy because you're like, oh, why am I even sharing this? But it does help build the habit. It helps just ensures that you can actually find ways to articulate all the things that are typically hard to articulate. And then when you have a body of work to actually pull from, everything else becomes easier too. So rather than trying to wait until everything's perfect and you have all these great stories to tell, just start practicing some of the small ones. And then by the time you have great ones to tell, it'll be way easier to open things up.
I was interested, everyone like has their own advice about starting companies, right? And a lot of it gets turned into content on various platforms, right? Like people become LinkedIn influencers, or every investor has their own, like I go on and on about storytelling and stuff like that. I often find myself wondering how much of it is that the meme of the plane with like all the bullet holes through it.
Yeah, survivor.
But exactly, the survivorship bias stuff. Are there any things that you have come to believe are like, actually, no, this kind of conventional wisdom is not in that category. This is actually very important. And then are any where you're like, I don't know, that seems like very kind of arbitrary or specific to certain types of companies?
Yeah, we're obviously all biased to like what's worked for us. Yeah. And I can't imagine trying to build Gamma without my two co-founders. And I think what helped us succeed, early on and through today is we have very complementary skill sets. We love spending time together. And like when you work on things, it feels like play. Like it just feels energizing. And even, I think we didn't really know that until we started tinkering early on. This is pre-fundraise. It's just like, okay, let's spend some nights and weekends building this, prototype. No stakes. Like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We don't owe investors back any money. It's just like, hey, let's invest our own time and energy. And fortunately, that time and energy was one where like every time we got together, it was like, I was super excited. And it's this moment of you work with somebody and you have this moment of it's like the yes and, right? Like you'll throw an idea out there and be like, oh yeah, that's cool. What if also that and then you keep on building on one another. And like for us, that was from day one. And so when we came down to like, we had this working prototype, it was like obvious we're going to go try to raise money because we really want to do this thing. And I would just encourage people, like as you're in the tinkering phase, just give yourself permission to find people where you do feel that click, where time spent together feels energizing. And ultimately, if you were to envision yourself like 4 or 5 years down the road, having spent all this time and energy working on this thing, and let's just say it didn't work out, would you feel like it was just like a complete waste of time? Like, can you imagine like having spent 5 years and it all just not doing, like, gone nowhere? And for me, I felt like it was absolutely worth the bet, because time together with them, I think would have been just made us stronger and better at just product building in general. And I think I would have come through on the other side just being, a better builder in general. And so like for me, it was a no-brainer.
That's probably conventional wisdom that is actually very right. Like, you should enjoy spending time with your because that's going to be miserable if you don't.
If you don't, yeah. But I think being honest with yourself is important. And so not trying to rush into that, giving yourself a little time to tinker and play before you go all in on something, I think is something for us, I think would have made a big difference.
All right. I think that's a great note to end on. I appreciate you joining us. If you haven't used Gamma, what's wrong with you? Go use it. It'll help you be a better storyteller, right? I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say what's wrong. You should go use this great thing that a very, very great team is building. And so we do have a couple minutes just for questions if you guys have any.
Hey, I love Gamma. My first experience of using Gamma was also magical. I was like, whoa, this is way closer to what I was imagining that I thought. It felt, when I first used it, very much as a consumer product, and there is a lot of consumer growth that you talked about. I'm very curious how you're now thinking about balancing Gamma as an enterprise tool versus continuing to invest in kind of consumer growth and virality, and what's the balance there?
Great question. For us, we felt like Prosumer was going to be, our initial entry point, but our ambition is to build, new standards. So if we're gonna, become a new standard, for sure, businesses have to be using us as well. So we've just started the sort of B2B motion for us, and we knew what we want to do on the Prosumer side is start building a brand that has general, broad awareness. People can recognize it, can start trusting it, and internally within a company, you start building up bottoms-up love. You have individuals that have their individual accounts, and they're all using it. And when IT or HR or procurement is asking like, which tools should we explore, there's already a pocket of users that love the product, and so that's given us now a chance to actually go in, have these B2B conversations, go much bigger, start expanding. And so we're early in that journey, but for sure, sort of Prosumer is the core growth engine that leads to a lot of the sort of top of the funnel for the B2B. And then we also have our API business, which is pretty new. API business also overlaps a lot with businesses. And, businesses, you might have end users using the product, but you also might have teams, like go-to-market teams, that want to automate a lot of content creation. And so they're both leveraging the API as well as end users using the product on a daily basis. And so for us, we really feel like all three, Prosumer, B2B, API, can work pretty well together as like a cohesive unit.
The ultimate goal is to take down PowerPoint and slides. You got to eventually, you got to go after the last redoubt of anyway.
Grant, thank you for doing this. So our 10-year anniversary at SPC is coming up soon, and as we kind of both reflect back and kind of plan for the future, I'm curious, what would you tell SPC to think about for its next decade? Like, what are we doing well? What could we do better? What's your feedback? And what are your feature requests?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that's just always been obviously valuable and important is just this notion of community and bringing the community together. I do think, like, even for myself, I studied mechanical engineering, but for much of my career, I was like on the finance and operations track, so more of a non-technical background. And I do think, this is going to be an age of many startups can be built by people that maybe don't have traditional backgrounds, and maybe they're still, you can, in my case, meeting two technical co-founders and working really well together. So how do you bring people from very different walks of life that might be domain experts in a specific area that can partner really well, and again, in our case, have complementary skill sets that together can build something special. And I think there's an opportunity for this community to represent some of that, and to kind of bring those folks together in a deeper level.
Awesome. All right, we'll do one more.
First off, awesome podcast. Appreciate it. Second off, I obviously saw your background. Clearly you have a background in finance. I think there are a lot of really cool AI companies today that are sort of touting crazy ARR metrics.
Sorry.
You guys are one of the very few that outwardly said, hey, like we're profitable. Did you think about unit economics and things like this sort of intrinsically based on your sort of finance background, or how did that sort of come into play? Was that thought of, or just sort of the case of what happened?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was, I would say, more of a side effect of us trying to stay pretty lean and efficient. And for sure, we've always monitored things like, how much are we spending? What are the payback periods? What is unit economics? But it's never been, hey, we have to hit this certain number, or like if we dip below this, like we got to go back. It's always been, one, fundamentally, do we feel like we're delivering value to end users, and is there sustainable growth there? And if that holds true, then the rest of it, we have different knobs. Like in certain cases, we might want to dial up like our AI costs because we want to go after a certain segment, or we want to test a certain type of feature and we don't know how much it's going to cost. We're not going to overly constrain ourselves, but having the optionality has been really helpful. So as long as we have sustaining like organic growth, we can then figure out how to actually navigate from there.
Grant, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right.